Hey everyone, and welcome to Two Steps Forward, where sustainability meets business reality. I'm Joel McCower in Oakland, California. Joining me from across the pond is Solitaire Townsend. Hello, Soli.
Hey, Joel. Joel, how was Impact?
Well, I was going to say, we both had, I'm guessing, a little bit of transatlantic FOMO last month because Trellis Impact and London Climate Action Week corresponded exactly same days. Only this year, next year, that will not be the case. Uh, and I want to hear about London Climate Action Week, the best one can encapsulate an event that had 1,000 different events. But Trellis Impact had about 300 different sessions and that many more speakers. And I have to say, the energy was amazing. Hopefully the content was good. I'm the wrong person to know that, but the team always delivers, and I heard a lot of great feedback. But the energy in Moscone, in San Francisco, Moscone Convention Center, was just great. And so, proves two things. One, our profession is not on the down wave. It may be lower than it was, but it's still going strong. And two is that people really want to come together. They really want to convene and connect and communicate and really share what's going on. And the more we built that into our event, the happier I think people were. And I'll tell you in a minute about the part of it that stuck with me most and that I was most excited about. But give me the 411, as we say here in the U.S. about. Actually, that's not a 411. Is an old thing that you used to be able to dial that for information. Don't do that anymore. But give me the download on London Climate Action Week.
Well, first of all, just to say, Louise from our San Francisco team, from Futerra San Francisco team, she was at Impact, and she chose to stay for Impact rather than come over to London for London Climate. So there you go. My own team really, really wanted to attend Impact because it's just such a highlight of their year.
And John Davies, who runs the Trellis Network, was over on your side, holding a meeting of our Trellis Network members in Europe, and otherwise just being John Davies. So yeah, a little of that back and forth.
London was magnificent and challenging, and one of the reasons it was challenging is that it was unprecedented heat wave. So we had a hotter week that week in June than there's ever been in recorded history in London, and that was an extraordinary experience to go through. And of course, every event opened with an acknowledgement of it. In fact, one of the events that happened during the week, not ours, one of the universities had to cancel its event that it was hosting on extreme heat, and that got on the front page of the BBC news website, was extreme heat event cancelled because of extreme heat. So that was in itself a real sort of focus. What we hosted a whole series of days of Solutions House, where we very much drilled down into storytelling and sustainability and climate. So we had Netflix and Sky TV and BAFTA, and we had a whole thread going through on film and TV and sustainability. We had a big YouTube party with a whole set of 60 of the top YouTubers in the UK. We had ministers come in, we had EU negotiators come in. We had big sessions on health, where with Wellcome Trust and others, we really looked into the intersection between health, storytelling and climate. And emblazoned on the wall, we had change the story, save the world. And that was one of the big conclusions that we had, was that that's not just an ambition, it's a necessity. We have to change the story if we're going to change the world. And we were so many of the people who attended some of our events, that was the only Climate Week event they were attending, because they were from the creative and communications industries. Wider outside of that, across London. And one thing which I can tell you is I was very lucky to be invited to a reception with King Charles III. And it turns out it's not just all of our homes that aren't air conditioned. It turns out our palaces aren't air conditioned either. So 2.5 hours of a wonderful, wonderful reception with a whole load of very sweaty sustainability people meeting the King. So that was quite a moment. But what we felt was this almost resurgence of energy around some of these topics, but a sense that we're going to need to change things this time round. If we're in the foothills of the next upwave on these topics, which it really felt like that we can't do what we did in the previous, in terms of storytelling, in terms of how we structure this, in terms of how we engage, particularly around businesses. And there are so many CSOs in town across European CSOs, French CSOs, German, UK, huge number of folks over from the US, and there was a real sense that things need to change. What that's going to change to, I think, is what's the interesting conversation over the next couple of months.
Yeah, and interesting indeed. That's, I think, similar to what we were experiencing, that people are as committed as ever, they're as energized as ever, but they know that we can't just go back to wherever we've been or continuing sustainable business as usual. One of the big themes in Trellis Impact, it being in San Francisco, was the AI, and there were yes, there were sessions that did not invoke those two letters, but there was quite a theme of that across, whether we're talking about nature and water or energy or communications or pretty much anything else. There was an AI component of that, and we had a lot of people from that community speaking. I co-hosted a AI infrastructure forum, which was invitation only, 65 people in the room, closed door, sort of the ecosystem of hyperscalers and developers and energy companies and community organizers and others, to look at what does sustainable infrastructure, what does a data center look like that's sustainable, and how does that become the norm? And that was really, really interesting and incredible agreement across the various sectors who do not typically talk to one another. But also in terms of engaging communities, where these things are being created, but engaging them early and engaging them authentically, and not just saying we're going to create jobs, which they typically don't, at least in the long term. There may be some short-term construction jobs, but actually, really truly engaging, and had some great presentations on that, and some tabletop exercises where the group is trying to come up with some non-negotiables and some high bar goals. It was really quite interesting. And what was remarkable is that whether it was Chatham House rules, so not going to name the companies, but there were a lot of big household names in there from the tech world. Whether you were one of the major hyperscalers or a local utility or a developer or a water company, they were just saying, we never talk to one another. We need to come together on these things. And that's, of course, one of the things I think both your company, Futera, and my company, Trellis Group, do well, which is to be a convener and a catalyst for those kinds of conversations in a safe space that are often not had. Yeah. So that was really interesting to say the least, but also reassuring that there's a need for what we do, in the gratitude that they express towards the end. Thank you for bringing us together. What can we continue this conversation? How do we move forward as more of a community and less as a number of individual entities? That was really terrific.
100%. So we had some corporates actually hosted their own room in Solutions House. So they had 3 days where they actually had their own room in the space. So they were having a whole series of meetings and gatherings, and as well as boardrooms and fishbowl sessions and roundtables, and just that energy, that magic that happens when people come together. And I actually felt like we actually got some work done, which doesn't usually happen sometimes at these big moments, of which it also was extraordinary with how tired and hot everybody was. But we actually got some work done and some outcomes, which I'll be writing up. But Joel, you're going to love this. We also, inspired by this podcast, one of the sessions we hosted was on the power of collective creativity. So how creativity can engage people, can bring people together, particularly consumers in public groups, and can help people generate the mind space they need to take on board some of these topics. But you can't have a collective creativity session without experiencing collective creativity. So we brought in an incredible choir master, and she stood at the front and she actually led the sustainability community in a collective singing exercise where we all sung Lovely Day. And not only did we sing Lovely Day, she taught us to harmonics and to do it in a round. So that was a direct inspiration from a session that we did, one of our podcasts around singing together as a choir. So I will send you the video of that. It was a beautiful moment of the sustainability community quite literally singing from the same hymn sheet.
I love that. I love that. And Bill Withers, who wrote and performed that song, I'm sure is smiling down upon the sustainability community, or at least was for that moment. That's great. I think, this is what we need more of, particularly in this challenging period that we're in, this down wave. How do we get out of that down wave? Well, I think part of it is surviving it. And then the next piece of that is just helping one another, lifting one another along the way. Okay, you go ahead.
I'm sorry. It's just, and we want this, but people. It's all about people, not organisations, not entities, not even necessarily sort of the AI people who we have coming along at some point in the future that we're in the singularity plus. But it all comes down to that magic of individuals. Sorry, because yes, you're right. It's all about people.
Well, we could talk for a long time about that, but we have a great conversation coming up that is also a lot about people with Katharine Hayhoe, climate scientist and advocate and author, and so I think that's well worth just getting right into. So let's talk to Katharine.
Let's see what she has to say.
Dr. Katharine Hayhoe is an atmospheric scientist who's spent her career translating climate science for people who don't want to hear it. She's chief scientist at the Nature Conservancy, a distinguished professor at Texas Tech University, an author of the U.S. National Climate Assessment, and the author of Saving Us, a climate scientist's case for hope and healing in a divided world. Katharine, welcome to Two Steps Forward.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's talk about that hope and healing piece. You've spent years pushing people from doom to hope. But a lot of our listeners are inside companies, and they're in this moment as we speak, watching a lot of the climate commitments their companies made slip in some fashion. Your book argues that the most effective way to address climate change is through personal, values-driven conversations, not doomsday warning. So what does that look like in the business context? For an executive or sustainability professional whose company is falling short of targets and is trying to put their best foot forward?
I think what we are seeing collectively is, in part, a failure of communication. Now, don't get me wrong, political polarization and ideology and geopolitics are really driving this thing. But underneath the fact that we have failed to connect what's happening, which I think of as the head, to why it matters, the heart, to what we can do about it, the hands. That connection would keep climate action going, because what it does is it shows people how what they already care about. In the case of a company, their priorities, their values, and their bottom lines are often very explicit. It's easier to do this for a company than it is for an individual often. But we haven't connected why climate change matters to the values and priorities and even the financial and economic bottom lines of the company in a way that really helps them see the economic cost of risk and the economic benefits of action. And we haven't integrated the solutions into the entire company rather than being like the sustainability office off in the corner that's trying to make sure that we use less packaging. The reality is that the entire baseline under our feet is shifting. Climate has never changed this fast in human history. And the companies that are going to survive and thrive in this changing world are the ones that are going to account for that changing baseline in a fundamental way across their entire business, their entire supply chain, their entire plans for the future. They're the ones who are going to make it in this changing world. And so it isn't a sustainability, a green, a climate, environmental issue sort of off in the corner office. It is actually a shift, a paradigm shift that has to underlay the entire long-term plan.
So I love this, and I want to dig in a little bit more around that connecting to values, because we had this whole era of corporate purpose where everyone was doing their corporate purpose. It always made me laugh a little bit, even though I worked on a lot of them, because every company actually has a purpose. It tends to be written into their articles of association or their documentation when you first register a company. And the purpose of the company is to generate profit for the shareholders. So every company has a legal purpose, and then they have these other purposes. And you're talking there about values around profitability, values around the business case, etc. But I think that businesses have some other values as well, which are a little bit more unique to each of them. Some companies really value themselves on being radical innovators. Some companies value themselves as always being the cheapest on the market. Some companies have an internal value of being really connected to their consumer, and other companies are, one of their key values is rabid competitiveness, that they basically watch everything which their competitors do. And I think that listening to you talk there around the fact that it's easier to connect to a company's values than it is to connect to a person's, 100% agree. And I think that maybe we could expand beyond the profitability value to sort of go, what is the corporate culture, essentially? What is the thing that this company tells about themselves? And I've found myself going in and sort of giving the generic business case of, this is how it's going to save you money, this is how you're going to be fit for the future, etc. And then realizing that, oh, well, with these guys, I need to just say the word innovation every 40 seconds. So it's like, with these guys, I have to talk about what their competitors are doing, because if their competitors aren't doing, that is their business case. Or with these guys, we've got to talk about how their communities and their staff care about it, because companies and those values that the company have are never. The problem is that they're never written down. They're not in the values statement. They're not in the purpose statement. They're on the website. It'd be really hard to find out what those are. And I think that sometimes people internally might do a better job of finding them out. So is there anything about how you've learned to find out and connect with the values of individuals that maybe we could do to see if we could dig out what the true values of some of these companies are?
Yes, and I was nodding through everything you were saying because I completely agree. And I'm glad that you expanded on and clarified that, because I was absolutely 100% referring to those more qualitative values and less tangible values that don't have a direct economic impact or dollar sign attached to them, but are fundamentally part of the culture of the organization. So one organization might really pride itself on giving back to the community. Another organization might pride itself on efficiency or innovation, or, being at the cutting edge of thought leadership in their field. And you are totally right. In fact, sometimes those values can be more powerful than just the economic argument. And that applies to people too. You can make an economic argument for how much money you'll save if you get a plug-in car versus a gas-powered car, or if you get a heat pump versus a furnace. But if it's actually tied to a deeper part of somebody's identity, and for most people, economics is not a deep part of their identity. It's sort of a mid to surface level part. If you can go a level deeper, then you have a much stronger connection. So it's the same for companies as is with people. And whenever I'm giving a talk or a presentation somewhere or engaging with the group, I always want to have a conversation with people in advance to learn a little bit more about that group. What do they care about? What are they concerned about? And so asking questions, it doesn't take a long time. You don't have to embed in the company for 3 months. Just even sometimes a half-hour long conversation about what makes you different. What do people care about in your organization? What do they prioritize? Asking those type of questions, you can often find the breadcrumbs pretty quickly, and you can make a direct climate link to whatever it is they already care about. Because the good thing and the bad thing, well, the bad thing is that climate change affects every aspect of our lives, whether you care about your community or efficiency or even being at the cutting edge of things. But the good news is, because it affects every part of our lives, then you can make the climate connection to almost anything that people care about.
I I sort of agree. I agree that what you're saying, that people do care about their values and how they align with where they work. And that works at an individual employee level in terms of how they might engage or think about the company or show up in all the various ways that they do. But the reward systems inside companies are still pretty hardcore around money. But there is a middle ground that I want to talk about because I think, and this is, I think resonates with a lot of what you've talked about, which is around risk.
Mhm.
And climate risk or whatever we want to call it. And there's lots of different kinds of risk, from financial, reputational, right to operate, or license to operate, regulatory, technology, and so on. Um, how do we talk about risk? Because I think that's the reward system in many cases.
Mhm.
It's between the bottom line, although it certainly affects the bottom line, and between the kinds of values that you've just been talking about. What have you learned about talking about risk uh, and how it links to climate and how that can affect how what companies do and how
Mhm.
employees should engage?
Mhm. You're totally right, Joel. In fact, one of the greatest frustrations I often have when I'm speaking with people in the business world is that it's just a round of finger pointing. In terms of, I want to change, but I don't have the ability. I'm the chief sustainability officer, but I'm not the CEO. Then you talk to the CEO. Well, I'd love to change, but the board of directors won't let me do it. Then you talk to the board of directors. Well, we'd like to change, but the C-suite won't let us. And so, or the investors won't let us. And if they are a publicly traded company, then the tyranny of the quarterly returns is just ridiculous.
Right.
So companies are being optimized to make short-term decisions, which is happening literally today at the cost of long-term success, which makes no sense unless you just want to, put your money in and get it out within less than a year. Most people have longer term investments. And that's why, for example, pension funds are a really powerful lever for change with the organizations that they're invested in. So are investment opportunities that really look for those true sustainability values, making sure that the companies they invest in will be successful in the future, not just now. So you're right, there's this total round of finger pointing that absolutely hinges on the economics. And so what you just pointed to, which is really putting a dollar sign on the risks, is something that can be incorporated into the current economic decision making. And the interesting thing to me is that the World Economic Forum surveys business leaders around the world every year and asks them to identify the top risks to business. And the risks of extreme weather events, which are skyrocketing thanks to
Right.
climate change, whether it's massive heat waves like the UK, the EU, and Eastern North America has experienced so far this summer. And of course, we're just speaking not even halfway through the summer at this time, whether it's the massive wildfires, whether it's the floods and stronger storms. Those have real economic damages. Businesses are already recognizing them. And the more we can quantify those risks in dollar figures, the easier it is for them to make decisions today. And the insurance industry has been a leader in doing that for decades already.
Right.
We've had some wonderful folks from the insurance industry in here talking us through that. Let's just stay with those extreme weather events for a moment, because I've been in this field for a long time, and I'm sitting here in sort of I think we're in the third extreme heat event in the UK now, and we've got another one coming. And it's been said many times, but our extreme heat events don't look as bad as others do in terms of what
Mm.
the actual sort of number is in terms of centigrade. But in a country that has no air conditioning anywhere, including in our offices, or as I discovered recently when I was invited to attend an event in the palace with the king, we also don't have air conditioning in our palaces, which was extraordinary.
Now that's the real problem right there.
Yeah. No aircon in the palace. I think there was a general feeling amongst folks who work in sustainability that once climate change started to bite, everything would change. That it would change for businesses who would start seeing this as like an existential risk to long-term profitability. It would change for politicians who would start realizing that they needed to invest in the long term. It would start changing for citizens around the world who were like going, we don't want this, quick, fix it. And that hasn't happened. The BBC still puts pictures of people frolicking on beaches whenever there's an extreme weather event that's literally killing people. And we're just not seeing the kind of action from businesses, from politics, or from citizens that perhaps the theory of change suggests. And I know that this is something that you and I have spoken about, that was a wrong theory of change, that actually that wasn't going to happen. And I think it would be really helpful, because I think a lot of people who are listening still are hoping that sort of like the event is going to happen that's going to change everything. And we just need to realize that that's not what's going to affect radical change, is because people have experienced an extreme weather event.
Well, you're totally right. Every time there is a massive, unprecedented, record-breaking extreme, which is happening frequently these days, multiple times a year, every time I see people on social media saying, oh, maybe this will be the one. But as you said, it is based on a fundamentally flawed theory of change that is not backed up by science. So this is why science is so important. Now, most people fully accept the physical science of climate change. The majority of people, even where I live in the United States, let alone in the UK and also other places, the majority of people accept that climate is changing, humans are responsible, and the impacts are serious. But what behavioral science says is that is enough to wake people up. It's enough to make them worried. And around the world, the majority of people in just about every country are worried. But the behavioral science is very clear that it's not enough to make people act. And so when you have a theory in science, you can hypothesize the theory, but then the idea is you test it with data. And unfortunately, the behavioral science of how to affect change in the area of climate action, it has lagged behind the physical science by decades. It is just really ramping up now, and some phenomenal cutting-edge research is coming out that's being conducted in multiple countries around the world, not just one or two. And it is showing definitively that humans are humans, that no matter what country we live in, most people are worried, but most people don't know what to do about it. And because of that, what scientists call lack of efficacy, because they don't know what to do, they do nothing. So not only that, but piling on more of the truly factual but scary stuff about how the ocean circulation is slowing down and the glaciers are melting and these heat waves are unprecedented, it increases their worry, and paradoxically, it actually tanks their levels of efficacy. Because the more of these events are happening, the less we feel that I as an individual can do anything about it. And certainly the burger I didn't eat, or the plane trip I didn't take even, that isn't going to make a dent in a global issue. Now, we have hard data in Canada, where I'm from, that this actually happened. We had a record-breaking wildfire season in 2023, and since then we've had terrible seasons in subsequent years. And all of those people who adhered to that flawed theory of change, that more disasters would make people act, they would have predicted that after the 2023 wildfire season, the worst on record, the entire country, second biggest country in the world, on fire from the East Coast to the West Coast, you would predict that the federal election that followed 9 months later would be a climate election. But I don't follow theories, I follow the data. And so I posed my own theory based on the data that actually the opposite would happen. People would detach, because how am I supposed to stop wildfires across the entire country? I'm not going to be able to do that. And that's what happened. People figured, you know what? Yes, I'm still worried about it, but why would I vote about it? Because there's nothing we can do about it anyways. The government can't do anything. I can't do anything. So I'm just going to vote based on the price of housing and groceries, which ironically are actually affected by a changing climate. And the person who won our election, Mark Carney, although he was the former UN representative for climate finance, won the election by actually removing the carbon tax instead of doubling down on climate action. And that is a classic example of lack of efficacy, because the government never communicated that it was actually doing quite a bit to address climate. People didn't think they were, and ordinary people don't understand the most important thing they can do has nothing to do with their personal carbon footprint. It has everything to do with their voice and how they catalyze societal change. So it is a completely flawed narrative based on a lack of science-informed communication. And now it is past time to not only accept the physical science, but to accept the behavioral science as well.
So I want to address a sort of a creative tension that I'm hearing here, because you're talking a lot, Katharine, about behavior change and about changing belief systems and changing of what motivates individuals to become engaged, involved, proactive, or in any way, shape, or form. But you also talk about the need for system change.
Mhm.
And so I wonder how you square those two things because they're very different propositions. One is retail door-to-door politics and trying to get individuals and help them relate, meet people where they are, as we all like to say, and find out what, motivates them. The other is well, system change, and that's beyond any one person, any one company, any one industry or market. So how do you square those two things? And where should we be? Because you just said, not eating that burger or taking that flight are, at best, marginal, if at all, impactful. So how do you square those two things? The need for individuals to engage and step up, along with the fact that we need to transform the reward systems built into the economics and the global systems, trade, and everything else that we have.
Well, you're totally right, Joel, and you've put your finger exactly on the tension. We need system-wide change. So if those of us who have not only the knowledge, but the wherewithal to make the best choices, and to be clear, I try to make the best choices I can. I get my electricity from wind power. I had solar panels before that. We only drive a plug-in car. I try a new plant-based recipe every week or two and add it to the rotation if the family loves it. But if those of us who had the ability, because it's a harder to make the right choice right now, it requires more knowledge, more time, and sometimes even more money. So if all of us who did that only did that, if all of us did it, it would have an impact. It would be maybe about 20-25% of global emissions, but it wouldn't actually address the root problem because we need to actually get rid of all our emissions. So what we have to do by changing the system is we have to make the easiest choice, the no-brainer choice, the most affordable and cheapest choice, the natural choice, the best choice for people, for the planet, for our future. And if you still want to make a choice that's very emissions intensive, you can still do it, but it's going to cost you a lot more money and it's going to take you a lot more time. Just a simple example. If I want to get from here to the city center, the cheapest and easiest and fastest way could be public transportation. If I really want to drive, then I could drive my EV. But if I drive my internal combustion engine, I still could, but I'm going to be paying an extra toll. And it's going to be really hard to find that gas or petrol station. I'm going to have to drive around a lot to find it because we don't have that many anymore, but we have tons of places to plug in your car. So that's a way that we need to change the system. So how does a system change? It changes when people use their voices. When we look at the abolition of slavery in the UK, when we look at how women got the vote, when we look at how civil rights were enacted in the US, or even how apartheid ended in South Africa, all of those changes began when individuals who initially were not well known, they were not wealthy, they were not influential, they were not famous, but they started using their voices to call for change. So how do we use our voice? First of all, obviously, we use it by having conversations. And this is a concept not just our carbon footprint, our personal footprint, but our climate shadow. Having conversations where we work, where we live, with the people that we play ultimate frisbee with or go walking our dogs with, or we meet at the parent-teacher association or at the church that we attend or wherever it is that we are, using our voice to talk about why it matters to us based on our shared values, because who knows your values more than the group you're part of, and what we could do together as a group. And then using our voice in terms of how we invest our pension funds and our bank, how we talk to our elected officials at every level, because cities can make changes much faster, for example, than countries can. How we talk to people at the organization or the company that we work for, the school that we attend. Making changes in our personal life to reduce our personal carbon footprint, but making them contagious by talking about them with other people. So that is how history tells us society has changed before. And we have a lot to learn from history, in my opinion, that we are not fully taking into account today.
Very much agree. It's the every problem is a new problem, except it's not. When you get right down to it, this is all the same old extraction, exploitation. I want to sit with efficacy, this idea that individuals feel that they don't have any power in this, and that actually helping people to understand that their power is within their community and within their voice. I think that there's something going on with businesses. I think that outside of business, people think of business leaders, particularly CEOs of extreme large businesses, of being the masters of the universe. That these are the people with the highest levels of choice, of power, that they can do anything, that they have very high sense of efficacy. I think we may be in a bit of a situation where it's not just the business case that is under threat. It's actually companies' sense of efficacy. We know that a lot of them aren't going to hit their targets in the way they intend to do. They're not going to miss. They're going to get part of the way there. They're going to have done a huge amount of effort and work and impact. Have been a lot of carbon saved, but the actual arbitrary numbers, most of which were picked because they looked like nice round dates and nice round numbers, aren't going to be hit. And I think that that's coming also with the sense of, well, climate change is just inevitable now. There's not anything we can do about it. I think some of those masters of the universe, some of those CEOs are afraid of failure. That they tried, that they took action, that it didn't save the world, and that they actually now don't feel like they can do anything. And you and I are both part of the WEF group, who's looking at the role of behaviour change. And it's been so interesting thinking about behaviour change and communication to the super powerful, to the Davos attending super powerful, and realizing that they're human beings too. And so what can we do to reignite a sense of actually, yeah, we can do something, that this is possible, to reignite leaders feeling that they can be successful in taking action on climate change, rather than what I think at the moment there is a bit of a sense of climate action being an expensive failure on their part. They've spent a lot of money and they've failed. Those aren't two values of spending a lot of money and failing that most CEOs like to think of themselves as having. So could we be it's going to sound really weird, but could we be a bit more compassionate to some business leaders who have felt that maybe that they can't change the world anymore?
I think you're totally right. We do tend to assume, those of us who are not CEOs, which I am not, that, people who are in charge of very large companies really have the ability to make change, and they just aren't. Now, for sure, they have more ability to do so than the average person. There's no question about that. But in those circles, it's often where I see that round of finger pointing. They point at the board points at the shareholders point at the CEO, and round it goes. And I do think that there's two big pieces missing that I talked about at the beginning. The head is there. So people, if you look at WEF surveys, for example, again and again, year after year, global business leaders highlight extreme weather events, ecosystem disruption, planetary scale instability as things that they are quite concerned about, especially over decadal timescales. But when you ask people around the world, and I haven't seen data on this just for CEOs, but I would not be surprised if you saw the same pattern at all, because you see this in every country around the world. Most people are worried, the head. Then you ask people, do you think it will affect you? That number drops by about half. People see it as an abstract issue. So a lot of CEOs are like, oh, for the benefit of the planet, I am doing all these things. But, you know what? It didn't really work out. Sorry, planet. We have a responsibility to our stakeholders. Well, guess what? There's no profit on a dead planet. The entire economy is based on having a healthy, thriving planet. So this is not the economy or the environment. It's a case of the entire basis that everything we do is founded on has to be able to sustain the ecosystems that sustain our life and sustain the entire economy. So they haven't made the head to heart connection. But then the even more important connection is the heart to hands. So too many times they see, again, solutions as like extra or nice to have, but optional. Our baseline is shifting so quickly under our feet. We have never seen changes this fast. It's as if for hundreds and even thousands of years, our civilization has been driving down the road looking in the rearview mirror. And we could do that because the road was pretty straight. And today, though, we are on a curve that is sharper than any curve we've ever negotiated. We are still, and all of our businesses are still looking in the rearview mirror. Well, you're not going to make it around the curve if you look in the rearview mirror. You have to look ahead down the road. And so it is a fundamental paradigm shift in the whole way that business does their planning that has to happen. And then you see, oh my gosh, there's actually completely different ways to do things that are calibrated for a changing baseline, changing conditions rather than static, stable ones. So how do you motivate people to care? And then how do you develop the fourth part, which is the nervous system that connects all of it? We humans respond really well to stories, to narratives, and to examples. And so I think it's very powerful how folks like Jesper at IKEA are really out there banging the drum on how there are examples of companies who have done the quote right thing, but by doing the right thing, they've actually created a more sustainable, and I don't mean sustainable in terms of environmental. I mean sustainable in terms of will be around long term and can keep going. A sustainable company, a stronger bottom line, happier employees, a thriving business, and really showing that when we account for the externalities of climate change, which are currently not accounted for in our primary economic system, when you account for those externalities, we already have every financial reason we need to make those decisions. And it's like we have to take off our old glasses that we're looking backwards down the road and put on a new set of glasses that are fully adapted to looking ahead to a changing climate and recognizing a better future is still possible, but only if we make the changes that ensure we get there. And if we don't, it isn't just somebody else in the future on the other side of the world who'd be suffering, it's us.
Wow, so many questions, so many topics there. Before I let you go, I have one more question, Katharine. So you have 10 minutes with the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And let's assume that she already understands climate and is concerned about it, understands that this is a real and highly impactful and potentially existential thing. What's the one underrated lever that you would ask her to pull? And not the obvious ones like renewable PPAs or science-based targets, but what's the one thing as the leader of this giant ship that's they're running? What's the one lever that they should be pulling? And what would you tell them?
That's a great question. If I had that conversation, I would probably start off, first of all, by asking her, what have been your greatest successes in the last 10 years? What have been your greatest challenges in the last 10 years? And looking forward, what are your goals? And what are you most concerned about as potential barriers to achieving those goals? So I'd want to get a sense of what her vision was and what things they had already dealt with, because that tells you where to connect. But in terms of where to look internally, I am a huge fan of, and there's actually social science identifying this as a societal tipping point. I am a huge fan of general education. Not about Atlantic meridional overturning circulations, but rather about the head, the heart, and the hands.
Right.
About what's happening, why it matters to you, and what you can do about it. So there's a lot of really phenomenal programs, whether it's Climate Voice or Climate Fresk or Heard with a U and an E, that are all about working with employees across a company to really help them understand not only what's happening, but why it matters to their industry and their company. And then I would have an incentive program to turn the employees loose. I'd be like, you know what? We want a sustainable company that can provide good jobs for you and contribute to the community and, fulfill whatever values we share, be it, continue to be at the cutting edge of innovation or whatever it is. And we recognize that the ground under our feet is shifting. We have to do things in a fundamentally different way. You, who have already been doing your jobs for X amount of years, you probably have ideas. We want to know what they are. And so that is what I would do. I would incentivize ideas and solutions from inside, and then I would make that into part of my thought leadership. Wherever I went, whatever I wrote, whatever I spoke, wherever I showed up at, I would be using that to promote our organization as a thought leader in this field, which in turn brings more recognition for what we're doing.
So it's a bottom-up approach to leadership. It's hearing what people are concerned about, what ideas they have, and then turning that into what, for better or worse, we call thought leadership at the senior level, to be talking about that. That's changing that system for sure.
It is. This whole conversation is just blowing my mind around the fact that we so often talk about companies as if a company actually had an attitude or as if a company made decisions,
Sure.
which of course they don't. It's just a bunch of people. And actually saying, when we start thinking about what companies should do and how we move companies, we're just talking about a bunch of messy human beings who have mortgages and love lives and and kids, and how we actually engage that particular group of people in taking decisions. This is brewing some ideas for me about human-led business change. Love it.
Yeah.
I should say that I am in the nonprofit sector, not in business, but as chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy, this is exactly the approach that I took when I joined the Nature Conservancy. I surveyed all of our scientists and science staff. We have more than 1,000 of them in 80 countries around the world. And I said, we want to be and identify ourselves as a science-based organization. That's a lot of scientists to have. But what does that mean to you? And how could we be doing it better? What do we need to really ensure that science is not only informing our decisions, but it's also monitoring our decisions and helping our decisions adapt to a changing world? Because even in science, we were making decisions for people and for nature that assumed a static baseline. And you can't go planting mangroves in a place where not only is sea level rising, but the land is subsiding. Those mangroves will be underwater before the end of the project life at this rate. You have to focus on where you can make the biggest changes. So really brainstorming how do we incorporate that changing baseline into what we do is something that I see as essential for the long-term viability of everything that we're trying to do as a nonprofit organization. But I think the same principle really applies for businesses as well.
You bring up one thing, and I know I said the last question, but this is
This is just too good.
but I do want to go there because you just brought up something really interesting to me, which is about scientists. Now, scientists, as you know better than anybody, have been under attack. Science in general has been under attack, not just around climate.
Oh, I know that personally, Joel. Yes.
I know you do, and and we hold science up as this basically message of truth and of hope and of this is what we know. And I guess what this brings up for me is, what are you learning about, and how would you advocate for science, the scientist community, such as it is, to change the way that they talk about this and uh, deliver information to all of us, including the business leaders that we've been talking about, in a way that maybe is more effective than the way they've been doing? What are they doing wrong, and what could they be doing better?
Well, this is something that I think about quite a bit because, according to data, even in the United States, where attacks on science are just, thick and fast. I mean, every week there's a new scientific instrument or buoy network or satellite being canceled. There's new reductions in scientific funding grants, reductions in graduate students. Every day I get attacked and harassed online, sometimes dozens, even hundreds of times. And even here, according to Pew Research, scientists are still quite respected messengers. So the most respected, the most trusted messengers are people we know. The closer someone is, often the more they trust them, except if it's your parent. That's probably the one exception. But in general, friends and family, colleagues and neighbors are very respected, and scientists tend to be right up there as number 2. But in the science community, there's 2 things holding us back. Number 1 is we have this perception that the facts are enough. If we just sort of write another long report in 10-point single-spaced font and we toss it over the transom, preferably with an IPCC stamp on it, that'll be enough. Well, we're starting to realize it is not enough. The facts are essential. They're important. We can't do this without the facts. The facts wake us up. That's the head. But if we don't have the heart and the hands, nothing's going to happen. And you could have the whole world worried, I think of it as, but if they don't know what to do, they'll do nothing. So we have to understand that it's not just about the physical science. We have to incorporate the behavioral science too if we really want action. That's number 1. Number 2, a lot of scientists still have that, well, I'm just a scientist. How can I speak to something? I'll just tell you that temperature is changing, but I don't want to tell you what to do about it. That's kind of like going to the doctor and getting a diagnosis from the doctor. And then you're like, oh my gosh, you're saying that you actually have found traces of a malignant tumor. What should I do? And the doctor's like, oh, I'm just a doctor. I can't tell you what to do. I mean, that's ridiculous. So I really feel that we climate scientists are like the physicians of the planet right now. And last year, for example, I published an essay in Nature Climate Action called Challenging the Neutrality Myth in Climate Science and Activism. We are not brains in jars. Each of us as scientists exists in the world. We have people and places and things we care about. And being upfront with our biases, which I do myself a lot, being upfront with who we are and why we care, and that's why we're doing this, I think is really important because it helps us build that head-to-heart connection. So 10 years ago, I published an essay in Science magazine called Why Facts Are Not Enough. And then just this past year, I published the Challenging the Neutrality Myth in Nature. And I feel like those two essays kind of bookend what I see as the biggest challenges that scientists have to overcome to be those trusted, effective communicators today.
Yeah. Well, I love the work that you do as a scientist and particularly as a communicator. The subtitle of your book, "A Climate Scientist: A Case for Hope and Healing in a Divided World," is really right on exactly who you are and what you do, and is so much needed. And so thank you. Is one of my, and I'm sure Soli's heroes in the climate space. Shiro's, so sorry. Uh, uh, we need to find a gender neutral word for people who we admire and appreciate very much. But thank you for that. And thanks for being on Two Steps Forward.
Well, thank you for having me, Joel. And if anybody wants more, because you might say, well, I'd love to have a conversation, but how do I do it? This one podcast isn't enough. Every week, I have a newsletter called Talking Climate, where I share good news about climate solutions, not so good news about how climate change affects people and places and things that we care about. That's the heart. And then concrete suggestions of what people can do to catalyze change. And I have just gotten together with a number of other women who really care deeply about science and climate. And we founded a new organization called the Talking Climate Collaborative, which is all about providing the tools and resources and training that people need to be those trusted messengers to their own communities.
And where do we get the newsletter?
The newsletter is talkingclimate.ca and the organization is talkingclimate.com.
I am a regular reader. I could not love her more. And also, she nails everything so perfectly. She knows everything as like a scientist in so depth, but she's such a clear communicator. And this idea around the fact of we have to stop thinking about convincing companies and start remembering we're convincing individuals within those companies, and that everything which we know about behavior change and psychology and the public and climate can just as well be applied to businesses and business decision makers. This is a bit of I'm having a bit of a revelation right now, Joel.
Well, it's always good when that happens, and stay out of your way when those revelations come rolling out. I have to say, I mean, first of all, I love Katharine, and she is such a gift to the sustainability community. Her, as you were saying, her clear communications from a scientist. It's not the norm. It's quite exceptional. I'm still unclear about this tension between head and heart in terms of how we connect to people, particularly in the business world. She spends a lot of time on the heart part, and I understand that we have to connect, as you're saying, as human to human. That's how we learn. That's how we share. That's how humans have always learned and shared, is human to human. And yet there's still some, there's some real information there. This heat wave in London that you all experienced last month, and you continue to experience, I think, this month. There's facts there. There's not just feelings. And so finding that sweet spot between head and heart and hand is something that I'm still grappling with, even after this conversation. As much as I love hearing from her, I'm still not convinced that in the business world, when you're talking to your CFO or your chief risk officer or your board of directors, that you're going to be able to use those, softer and clearly more human approaches.
Now, you see, this is where I differ, because I think that quite a lot of the time people use the facts to justify their feelings. And that it's not that the facts convince them, it's that they're already convinced. When we look at the number of business decisions that are taken which aren't logical and which are driven by whatever's hot in the media right now, or what your competitors are doing, or what the zeitgeist is telling you to do, often without a very clear business case. We could talk about AI tokens, but being burnt through is a good example of that.
Sure.
Because it's zeitgeist, it's hot, it's what everybody's doing right now. And then the facts are used to justify those. I actually think that there's a little bit of mythology out there about fact-based decision-making in businesses that perhaps isn't the case, and that we see at the moment that because we've got a downwave and the media isn't talking about topics around climate and what have you as much, I promise you that once the media does pick back up, even if the business case, even if the facts, even if the stats, even if the money, even if the climate science doesn't change a jot, as the moment this is hot again and everyone's talking about it and it is a fashionable topic, suddenly we'll find it much easier to get an audience for the facts. So I'm with Katharine on this. I think that businesses and again, we're not talking about businesses, we're talking about individuals, that people inside businesses convince themselves that they're rational decision makers, and they ain't. And that's something which perhaps we need to understand. And perhaps we're being a little bit too respectful of trying to communicate with the facts and the stats and the economics and what have you, and then wondering why we're not getting anywhere. And perhaps we could do with being a little bit more emotional, but not emotional in the way we're emotional. Perhaps emotional in terms of, what does this mean for your career? What does this mean for your legacy? What does this mean emotionally for you as a business leader, as a person, on the things which you hold dear, rather than the things which matter to me?
Yeah. Well, clearly, it's not either or. It's not facts or feelings. It's both, and this has always been this way. And I've talked about this a lot around, how do you balance this incredible geeky technical stuff with the fact that this is about our bodies and our lives and our families and our communities and our future. And integrating that, how do we do that? With storytelling. And so figuring out how, and this is your world as way more than mine solely, but how we tell those stories and how do we integrate head and heart, and in a way that's contextual, which again, if you're talking, to someone who is talking to investors, right? In other words, if you're talking to investor relations or a CFO or someone or the CEO, how do you make this relevant? And a lot of it, and Katharine talked a little bit about this, is the reframe that this, and I've spoken about this, talked about this at GreenBiz back in February. That's not about reducing emissions. It's about redesigning business for a clean, decarbonized world. And I think there's just a lot of reframing there that we, can bring the facts and the feelings together in a way that really can make a difference.
And I think the job is that both are difficult to do. So to make sure that you're thinking, quite a lot of this also comes down to identity and how people see themselves and their role in the world, and what do they want to be famous for, and thinking through some of that as well as some of the dry information. It's going to be an exciting couple of months when we work to actually try to put these two things together.
Well, it's going to be an exciting number of years, I think, that we continue to do this work for a long, long time. So let's get out of this episode and let people get back to their doing that hard work. So I will read us out. 2 Steps Forward is available wherever you get your podcasts. Just go to twostepsforwardpodcast.com. That's twostepsforwardpodcast.com to find past episodes or to send us a note, suggest a topic, give us feedback, anything you'd like. Recipes are even good. Who knows what you're going to come up with. And don't forget to subscribe to Trellis Briefing, the daily newsletter from Trellis Group. Just go to trellis.net to sign up. And of course, please sign up for Soli's weekly Substack essays. That's it for this episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.